You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Welcome, fellow patriots. Get ready for an hour of unabashedly pro-American, pro-conservative, and pro-biblical principles. This is the Blake Johnson Program.
Oh, the hysteria is just running rampant in this country, and I don't know how I'm going to live with myself. And I don't know how we're going to survive in this country of stupidity. That is how we're going to start the show today. Hello, everyone. My name is Blake Johnson, and you are listening to the Blake Johnson Program on the Lanterns Radio Network on July 2nd, 2018. In a time where one would question whether we even have freedom or not. We are living in a time where freedom no longer seems to be at the forefront of our minds. Now it's give me, give me, give me. Now it's what's in it for me. We have Independence Day coming up in just a couple of days, and it gets harder and harder and harder each year for me to celebrate Independence Day, because it almost seems like, and I believe I said this last year, it seems like I'm celebrating the existence of a country that no longer is here. It seems like I am taking a day off to remember a time where there used to be a country called the United States of America that truly did believe in its Constitution, in Judeo-Christian beliefs, in freedom and liberty. But now it doesn't really seem like we're that way anymore. Now it seems like we're drifting further and further away to where we become a shell of what we used to be. You know, I was in church over the weekend, and the pastor talked about what freedom really means, and freedom itself. And what does it mean for our lives? What is real freedom? Real, true freedom. And that's where I want to begin the show. I don't want to talk about what some idiot celebrity said or anything like that. I want to talk about something that really matters and that affects all of us, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whether you voted for Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders or Jill Stein, whether you voted for Donald Trump or Darrell Castle or the Independents or whoever it may be. It doesn't matter. Maybe you didn't vote at all. But this is the time to be here. We can disagree on politics, but we should be able to agree on principle. There are several things about our society that have drastically changed in the way that we view them now. And it goes back to morality. What is freedom, and where does freedom come from? And does freedom just come from wherever you want it to be? Or is it tied to something? Well, the founders believed, and I believe this as well, especially as a Christian, that freedom is tied to morality. And that is where that's the foundation of freedom. Freedom doesn't mean you can do whatever the heck you want to do, and it doesn't matter if it affects anybody else or not. That's anarchy. That's lawlessness. Freedom, true freedom, comes when you are living for something higher than yourself, when you're not making everything about you. Because you see, when you make everything about yourself, you're limiting the potential for the future. We're all flawed human beings. We all mess up. And if we only believe that freedom comes from what we feel like, well, feelings change. Things change. Circumstances change. Sometimes you get yourself into a situation that you can't control, and you wind up being in a pretty bad spot. But that's not your fault. Well, if the only thing you rely on is your own limited self, that's not freedom. You're being enslaved to your human nature. Real freedom comes from, yes, when the government, for the good portion of your daily conduct, leaves you alone. But you can only have that when you have a moral, religious people. I get pretty worked up over history sometimes, especially when it comes to the Founding Fathers, because I rarely hear anyone say anything that is even close to historically accurate about the Founding Fathers, in particular when it comes to their faith. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every member of the Founding Fathers was a Christian. That's not true, obviously. But the majority of them were. The majority of them at least believed that this nation should be founded on those very principles. I mean, you have to believe in Christianity. You have to believe in Judaism. But you also have to be willing to live under a system of laws. And those laws have to be based on morality. And morality comes from a moral law giver. Because you can't have moral law unless you have a moral law giver. And the only way you get that is someone who is higher up than you. Someone who is sinless. Who is guiltless. Who is blameless. So these things have to come from something higher than ourselves. Because if it doesn't, well, we've seen that example throughout history of nations that used to believe in God, that turned away from Him and began doing what their own passions desired. And that's what's happening to America. We don't believe in God anymore. We certainly don't believe that He should be endorsed publicly. We don't believe that, you should, if you want to believe in that stuff, that's fine, but don't take it outside of church. We have changed the mindset of what it means to be an American. An American used to mean that you believed in God, that you believed in a moral law, not you believed only in yourself and you made everything about you. But that is what we have turned into. The divorce rate in America is atrociously high. The number of people in today's America that get married is atrociously low. Many people don't get married. They either cohabitate or they just give up. And they don't get serious about life. They don't take life very seriously. Which is very sad. It is sad to see that happen. We see respect at an all-time low. You see that just by turning on television or going out in public. The way that, many people talk to their parents, the way that many parents treat their children, the way that people treat each other. It's all about me. It's all about what I can do. We have taken that idea of individualism and taken it to an extreme level. And I know as Christians it's easy for us to say, well, I don't believe in individualism. And to an extent, I agree. But there has to be a free will. And that free will comes when you individually choose, yeah, I'm going to follow God. I am not going to follow my own will. That's what individualism is supposed to mean. It's supposed to mean a maturity. It's supposed to mean that you're not going to actively go against somebody else's basic human rights because you feel like it. But that's what we're doing. Look at abortion. How much abortion has risen. Not just, abortion has risen, in terms of being committed, in terms of the procedures, but in terms of favorability. The public perception of abortion has gone way up. And as we're sitting here waiting for the President of the United States to make a nomination, we're sitting here doing that, and we're already hearing them cave, the President cave and others cave, saying, well, I don't really know if we're going to go with Roe v. Wade or not. It'd be nice to get rid of it, but we can get rid of it, but ultimately it's going to go to the states, which is true. I mean, legally speaking, it is true. It would go back to the states, but still, it seems like we're not willing to make the moral argument for anything anymore. You see the Republicans in Congress caving or staying silent as the President of the United States continues to lie and continues to go back on his promises. I mean, the thing he did over like a week or two ago over immigration was despicable. And how, he went back on a key campaign promise and no one really seems to be talking about it. The media, they're not any better. They'll make up lies about the president. They'll make up lies about Christians. They'll make up lies about anyone that they disagree with to fit their own agenda. You saw that with Time magazine and the little girl that turns out was never separated from her mother at the border. At least not by ICE. Saw several cases of that. You see the media constantly refer to Christians and conservatives as, hard right-wingers or, crazy people or controversial people. And it makes me wonder, is there any chance at all of us turning this ship around? I don't know that there is. But you see, I think that's where we begin to get into trouble. Because we try to look at the solution from a big picture standpoint. In terms of we try to look at it from the changing things at the national level. We think that if we just elect the right president, or we elect the right congressman or senator, or we do this or we do that, we change people's mindset here, change it there. Look, I'm all about voting in people who, at least from what it seems like, agree with the principles of our founders. We never really know until they get in there, and a good portion of the time they turn out to be a fake. But that's not the solution. The solution really truly begins at home. It begins with your family. It begins with your children. It begins with the relationships that you have with other people. Social media has continued to make us less social with people. We live in our own little bubbles. Well, that certainly doesn't help the culture. That certainly doesn't help us being able to heal the divide and the divisions among us. Because we don't talk to each other unless it's on Twitter. Then we lash out and call each other Hitler or scumbag or any other name you can think of. You send your kids off to public schools thinking that they'll get an education when half the time they get indoctrination. We see this play in and day out. So what do? We've talked about this on our show before. You've got to get control over your own life. Ultimately, as much as we like to think that we can change the world. Ultimately, the only thing you can change is that short little radius around you. The people that you are closest to. And then, over time, it begins to have some effect. But the goal shouldn't be to change the nation. The goal should be to change your way of thinking, to change your heart, to renew and transform yourself into the likeness of God. That is how things change. Remember, Jesus never came to this world for politics. He never came to set up an earthly kingdom. The kingdom of God lives inside of you, inside of each of us. It's not from a party. It's not from a celebrity. It's not from a politician. It's not from a movement or a charity, though those things are good. It goes much deeper than that. And until we realize that, until we truly wake up and decide, each of us individually, that we are going to live for something higher for ourselves, we are going to return to morality, to the moral fabric, the foundation that set us up as the greatest nation on earth, we will never truly know freedom again. And that is just the way it is. It's the way it's always been. America is no exception. So please, as you're celebrating this week, remember why we even have independence in the first place and where that even came from. And know what you're being taught, and know history, and know that things can turn around for you and your family if you educate, empower, and enlighten. Back in a minute. All right, welcome back to the Blake Johnson program. I just am. I want to say I'm beside myself, but at this point, it takes a lot to really shock me anymore and to really, truly disgust me. Because everything's disgusting. Everything's terrible. But I wanted to address this specifically because it hits pretty close to home for me. I live in Missouri, grew up in Mansfield for the first 13 years of my life, and then I moved out to where I am now. And side note, I just paid my car off this over the weekend, so I'm in the process of finding an apartment and moving out and everything, so that's going to be good. But anyway, I grew up in Mansfield, and one of the biggest things about Mansfield, Missouri, is the Laura Ingalls Wilder Museum. Laura Ingalls Wilder, obviously that name is modern, for modern day, that name is famous because of the TV show Little House on the Prairie. Laura Ingalls Wilder, very famous author from the 1800s. She settled, her and her husband Almanzo, both settled in Mansfield, Missouri after they got married. And I think she lived in Mansfield for almost 60 years. It was quite a while. Several decades that she lived in Mansfield. She lived here, and she lived there until her death. I can't even remember what year it was. Was it like 1952, I think, was when she passed away? I'll have to look it up. But anyway, so there's this controversy, I'm sure you've heard of it, of the Laura Ingalls Wilder Award being changed because somebody found one of her quotes offensive in one of her books. Now, again, This book came out 150 years ago? It's been a while. But it talks about the, perceptions of Indians and blacks. And of course you would know during that time, it wasn't all that positive. Now, I'm not going to get into, all the mistakes that we made too, because we made plenty of them, definitely. I want to focus on this specific part of it, though. So, you have to remember, there was a significant massacre that took place, the Minnesota Massacre of the year 1862. And in this book that Laura Ingalls wrote, the character of Mrs. Scott doesn't like Indians and blames them for the Minnesota Massacre, in which dozens of settlers were killed by members of the Dakota tribe. So it's not like all the Indian tribes were just peaceful, loving people, and all we did was come in and wipe them out. That's not what happened. Plenty of them were terrible, dangerous people. Not all of them. I'm not saying it's because they're Indian. I'm just saying that you get a bunch of groups together, especially ones that live in the wild like that or don't live in civilized society. It can be pretty easy for at least one group to go crazy and to be a little extreme. But all she was trying to do was write something that people could understand and maybe some of them relate to. She was actually asked about this she died in 1957, actually. But before she passed away, a reader pointed out a specific passage to her. By the way, the passage says, this book came out in 1935. So she says, there the wild animals wandered and fed as though they were in a pasture that stretched much farther than a man could see, and there were no people. Only Indians lived there. Well, that's what's causing a lot of stir. There were no people, so you're saying Indians aren't people? Well, a reader way back then pointed this out and had a question about it and asked Laura Ingalls Wilder about it, and this was her response. She said, "You are perfectly right about the fault in Little House on the Prairie and have my permission to make the correction as you suggest. It was a stupid blunder of mine. Of course Indians are people, and I did not intend to imply they were not." And then the word people in that quote I read to you was then replaced with the word settler. Now, if you are familiar even a little bit with Wilder's work, you'll know that there was a lot of controversy during that time related to, Indians and Black Americans. However, you'll also know that in many of the books, it deals with those real world problems, but there's a lot of sympathy towards the Indian, especially as far as Pa is concerned. And there's debates about it in the books, but it's still a work of fiction. Not everything in it is true. And this just goes back to what we've talked about many times on this show, where leftists, progressives, they just can't leave history alone. Look, there are things about our history that I do not like. The way that we treated Indians, the way that we treated black people, the way that we treated women, the way that we treat women today in many cases. And it's not a uniquely American problem. These kinds of problems happen all over the world because we are sinful people. Remember, guys, it goes back to that whole issue of morality. We're a fallen people. But it's not going to be solved by erasing history, by pretending it never even happened, and then claiming to be a progressive. Well, we've made such progress. Well, what do you mean? You've erased the history. How do I know what progress you've made? Or any progress? So that's ironic. You want to wipe out Laura Ingalls Wilder from history like that, but you want to also claim that we've made tremendous progress since those times. Well, if people can't even read about those times, how will they know? And it's pretty apparent, especially when you consider Wilder's work as a whole. She was not trying to be racist or anything like that. That was just the culture at the time and the way people communicated. Didn't mean that they hated those people, but it did mean they had a different language than we do now. Kind of like we have a different language than people will, 50 to 100 years from now. And they'll think us the barbarians. In some ways they should, as long as there's abortion going on. But you see my point. It's a never-ending cycle of being outraged about something and doing anything you can to get rid of it. Now, I know the official organization that decided to get rid of the title for the award, because they have these reading awards, these for, kids and things like that. But they've changed some of the they've changed the title of the award. I'm trying to remember the exact title of it. But I think it's like the Children's Literacy Award, something ridiculous like that. That it just takes her completely out of the picture. And again, this award has been around for a long time, and they're just randomly taking it out because of that. Well, the Mansfield Museum expressed disappointment at this change. Now, again, the museum, the Laura Ingalls Wilder Museum is in Mansfield, but the ones in Mansfield, they did not make this decision. A higher-up organization did. And Mansfield Museum, Laura Ingalls Wilder Museum, disagree with that decision strongly. And rightly so. But this is just going to keep on going and going and going. And it's just not going to end. So, again, it goes back to, are we really free? Because if we're so willing to restrict what people can read and what people can see and how people can feel, is that true freedom? Or is that your form of dictatorship? We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz. For great radio, get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Well, hello, America. Welcome to the Blake Johnson program. Happy Independence Day for those of you who are aware of history and realize that today is technically the real Declaration of Independence, even though the officialized Declaration of Independence wasn't until, well, Wednesday. I always find it interesting how people make such a big fuss over whether it's July 2nd or July 4th. Honestly, I think either one works. I don't think it's one to really fuss about. Yes, the Continental Congress officially declared its independence from Great Britain today on 1776. But they still had to finish the declaration. They had to, bring out the official copy of it and everything, so it wasn't quite done yet, and that was finished July 4th for the people to be able to read and hear from. So the official process took a little bit longer to finish, but the official declaration from the Congress was July 2nd. So, whichever way you want to do it, that's fine. National holiday is Wednesday, so regardless, take some time this week to really reflect on the independence of America. We have to spend just a few moments addressing the horrific shooting that took place over the weekend, last week, at the Capital-Gazette newspaper near Annapolis, Maryland, in which a gunman came in and killed 5 people, injuring others, and causing damage to the newspaper. Very horrific shooting that took place, and this all resulted from the shooter who sued the newspaper back in 2012 because of a newspaper article, I believe in 2011, that was reporting on his guilty plea for criminal harassment. So this guy has had run-ins with the law before. And the shooter sued the paper for defamation. It was brought to court and in 2015 was dismissed by the circuit court judge because the newspaper didn't report anything inaccurate regarding the guilty plea. They were just reporting on public record that was available for everybody. So it led to the judge Lamassny, who said that the shooter apparently didn't know the difference between real defamation and non-defamation. So it was just, it seemed like a, pretty clear-cut case of that. And ever since then, this guy had been harassing the newspaper for years and the staff until finally he decided to kill them. And it was terrible what he decided to do. And I guess, because I was kind of confused as to how he was able to, for years, harass these people and not be ever taken into custody. I mean, he killed them with a pump-action shotgun, 12 gauge, and I was looking at some of the police reports, and he barricaded himself near the rear exit of the office to prevent people from escaping. He shot through the glass door of the office and opened fire on multiple employees. The police were able to evacuate others to safety. And he's been charged with first-degree murder. So, yeah, just horrible story. Now, the reaction to the reaction from the paper has been both, I think, courageous, but also pretty interesting. I don't know if it's worth attacking the newspaper or criticizing them necessarily, because I do think they made a pretty good point. But following this tragedy, the newspaper published an edition the day after the gunmen stormed on their offices. On Sunday, the staff of the paper wrote an open letter to the public that was both heartfelt and defiant. They thanked their surrounding community for showing love and support, and rebuked the death threats and emails from people, quote, "we don't know," celebrating our loss, or the people who called for one of our reporters to get fired because she got angry and cursed on national television after witnessing her friends getting shot. The many cards, letters, emails, flowers, food, text messages, and signs served as a balm to our wounds, the staff wrote. In another show of support, 800 people subscribed to the Gazette's website. Now this is where it gets interesting. At a more subtle level, the letter took on another tone. It took an opportunity to take a swipe at President Trump for his nearly nonstop criticism of the mainstream media at large. The letter says, quote, "We won't forget being called an enemy of the people." It didn't call out Trump by name, but it's pretty obvious who they were talking about. And this is it's fairly interesting, and I think it is important to talk about, because I don't like the President of the United States referring to the media as the enemy of the American people. I think the media has largely discredited itself and themselves, whichever one you want to use. I think many aspects of the mainstream media have done great damage to objective reporting, but I refer to that more on an individual level, because there are people at these organizations like CNN and MSNBC and others that are credible. Very few, but there are some who choose not to go with the rest of the network. So while I understand the frustration that the president has with the media and the fact that they have covered fake news, they have lied about stories, they have taken things out of context many times, and not just with Trump. They did it with George W. Bush as well, and many other Republican presidents. But referring to them as the enemy of the American people does nothing but further divide the populace. Especially when they finally do report on something that is accurate and the people just dismiss it because, well, they criticize Trump. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that the media don't deserve any, condemnation. They do. They deserve to be condemned. They deserve to be called out. I don't blame anyone for not wanting to get their news from them. But there is a line that you don't cross, especially as the president. The press is supposed to be one that we can, turn to, and if it's corrupt, call for people to go in and change it, and to be the journalists that you want there to be out in our world. But just, painting a broad brush and calling them all the enemy, well, there are quite a few other places and people that I would consider a bigger enemy to the people than the mainstream media, like North Korea, Russia, many parts of the Middle East, Iran. I mean, we could go on, but it makes me feel pretty uncomfortable. And look, it also makes me uncomfortable because we switched places just a few years ago when Barack Obama was in charge. He went after Fox News. His administration went after Fox News all the time. Said that they weren't a real news network. Now, Obama didn't, at least from my recollection, directly refer to them as the enemy. But he did say, when he ran for president, that we have to punish our enemies and reward our friends. And he was talking about political enemies. We have to punish them. Not just defeat them in an election, but punish them. So, maybe he didn't say the exact same thing that Trump did, but the animosity was there. It was clearly there. Now, most of the mainstream media was on Obama's side. You had Fox News and talk radio, and, you had the Blaze at a certain point. But, some of these networks that are bigger now were pretty fledgling back then. But suffice to say that it's not good for anyone from any party to be doing things like that. So I can understand the criticism from the Gazette on that end. They're probably liberal, but that doesn't really matter. I think they're accurate with that description. Okay, so I want to spend a few moments talking about the Supreme Court stories. There's a few, actually, not just the retirement of Justice Anthony Kennedy, but the decisions that they've made recently on some pretty important stories. But let's go ahead and talk about Anthony Kennedy retiring. He announced his retirement late last week, and it was a big big reaction to both people on the left and the right. Kennedy was nominated, I should say, by Ronald Reagan, and obviously confirmed by Congress. He served on the Supreme Court for like 3 decades and made a huge impact on some key issues. The most infamous being Roe v. Wade. He was the deciding vote in approving Roe v. Wade, and that alone causes me to really dislike that guy. He's been very friendly to gay rights and abortion and affirmative action and things like that. Obviously he's made some good rulings, but he also has made some pretty bad ones. So he's been kind of up and down. He was originally thought to be a pretty conservative guy, and has turned out to be not so much. So I'm personally pretty glad that he's leaving. He's like one of my least favorite Supreme Court justices right now anyway. So now the quest begins. Who's going to replace him? Well, the president has a list of 25, technically 24, because one of them was Neil Gorsuch, of people that he was going to consider, and one of them he was going to pick. He's choosing again from that list. He chose Neil Gorsuch from that same list a few years ago, about a year and a half ago. But now he's got it down to, I think, 5. He's narrowed it down to his top 5. He had some interviews over the weekend with those top 5, and he will be making his decision probably sometime this week, I'm guessing. By the end of the week, I'd say he'll make a decision. And there's some good ones, and then there's some iffy ones, and then there's 1 or 2 not-so-great ones. One of them being Thomas Hardiman, who's had a long history with having some not-so-great stances when it comes to socialist issues and constitutional issues. And, I've heard some people on the right say, oh, he's a great guy. I beg to differ. He was in cahoots with Trump's sister, who Trump almost nominated last time, or at least he was considering it. Trump's sister was very pro-abortion and not very friendly to originalist constitutional thinking. So he was in second place, essentially, last time around. He had it down to Neil Gorsuch and Hardiman. He wound up picking Gorsuch, thank goodness. Hopefully that turns out to still be true later on. But we'll see. There's a lady by the name of, I think her name is Amy Barrett, I believe is her name. And she served with Justice Scalia. She was a protege of his, and she's got some very solid reviews on the Constitution and originalism, and so on and so forth. So I'm really hoping I really want him to pick either Barrett or Mike Lee. Mike Lee, United States Senator from Utah, and he's been one of the most consistent conservatives in the Senate, but also he has a very in-depth knowledge of the Constitution. And he I don't know if he's made arguments on the Supreme Court, but he has either interned or he's served with a Supreme Court justice. He has experience in law, deep experience. I believe he even said that since at 10 years old, he either read or watched a Supreme Court ruling, and he was very, very enthralled by it, which is unusual for someone that age, but it goes to show he's not just a conservative, he is a constitutionalist, which is more important here. We need someone who understands the Constitution and and judges based on the law, regardless of whether they agree with the law or not. We have to have people there who aren't there just to get their agenda passed through, whether they're on the right or the left. And that's the important thing. So I'm hoping one of those two he picks, and we'll see. He says that he wants to pick someone who is originalist, who has a deep regard for the Constitution and understands it deeply. So that does make me feel good. And the fact that he picked Neil Gorsuch last time gives me better hope that he might pick a good one this time too. But we'll see, because this is where it really gets interesting. Because back then, Gorsuch was just replacing another conservative, so there wasn't really a big fight there. Democrats didn't put up much of a fight. And plus, he also had an in-depth knowledge of the Constitution too, and people from both the left and the right respected him. Now, you have a big chance of turning the court in the favor of conservative constitutionalists, which is a huge, huge deal. And you have the possibility of overturning Roe v. Wade, which is something that I didn't think we'd see anytime soon. But this is where the real fight begins, because this is where you could really turn the tables. Now, many on the left have already said, now they're coming after Roe v. Wade. Now we're about to lose our right to abortion, which you don't have a right to abortion, and they're losing their minds. On the right, they're celebrating a little bit too much, because we aren't for sure how the other justices would vote. We're not sure exactly how Neil Gorsuch would vote. We assume that he would vote for the side of pro-life, but we're not sure because he doesn't have a record on pro-life issues. And that's one of the concerns I had during the process of his nomination, because I didn't know. We have no idea. Some of the key issues, very little to no knowledge of as it related to Gorsuch. So we've got to find someone who has a record on that. But at the same time, the president said that he's not going to ask any of them if they would overturn Roe v. Wade. That doesn't necessarily mean that he wouldn't ask them about their record and their views on abortion, but as it relates to Roe v. Wade, he's not asking them about that, which in a sense I can understand, because when you go through the confirmation process, because of what they did to, what was his name? During the Reagan administration, he tried to nominate Robert Bork, who was very conservative and made his thoughts known on things like abortion. And because of that, people like Joe Biden and, what was his name? Kennedy, the guy, Robert Kennedy, Ted Kennedy. Because they came out and opposed him, they basically smeared Bork and took him down. Ever since then, whenever a Supreme Court nominee is going through the process, they do everything they can to not be specific about how they would vote on specific issues. So if they're asked about Roe v. Wade, which they will be, they're not going to give a direct answer. So when you see that, don't get too afraid that they're just dodging the question because they don't want people to know, don't want you to know what they believe. It's because they don't want the politicians to know what they think, because then they'll just try to make it about their agenda instead of the Constitution. Because in reality, Roe v. Wade is unconstitutional. It is unconstitutional. The federal government does not have a role or right to tell you what you want to do with a child, an unborn child. If you're going specifically based on the Constitution, it's up to the states and the people respectively, as the 10th Amendment, clearly states. Okay, so we don't really have time to get into some of the Supreme Court rulings that happened. We may save that for another show. I wanted to say a quick word before we close out the show today, and that's a huge thank you to you, the audience. Today, or this week rather, marks the 1-year anniversary of my show. I've been with Lanterns for a whole year, officially tomorrow, and it's hard to believe a year has already gone by. And it's all thanks to you. It really is that I'm still here, because, with the numbers coming in and everything, just knowing that there are people out there who are listening each and every single week, it means a lot to me, because sometimes I just don't, many times, most of the time, I wonder why people want to listen to what I have to say. I think you have more important things to say regarding your lives, but it does mean a lot to me. And I remember when I first started, when I was leading up to when I was first starting, I just recently graduated college, so I was trying to figure out where I was going with that. and I had a pretty bad relationship with College of the Ozarks in regards to my major, in regards to my, radio experience there. So I wasn't even sure if I wanted to do radio anymore. I knew I wanted to, but I wasn't sure if I had the will to keep going. You know what I mean? So, when I got this opportunity from Jonathan Dunn and Dylan Lyles, it just meant a lot to be able to do this again and to have more freedom to actually say what I believe, which I didn't have at C of O. So, being able to do that and have guests on, which I'll do more of pretty soon in the near future, it's been great. So we'll see where it goes from here. We'll see what the next year has for us. But yeah, it's just a huge thank you to you for listening. And please, share this show, share this podcast if you believe in what we're doing here. If you believe in the principles that I try to talk about here, share it with someone and spread the word. You can do that by sharing it on Twitter or Facebook, just the link from Spreaker.com. I know most of you listen through the website there. Or just wherever you listen to it, iTunes, iHeartRadio, wherever you can find it. It does mean a lot. So with that, I'm going to close out the show and call it a day here. Hope you have a great Independence Week. Great time to reflect and be with family and loved ones. Hope you stay cool. Please stay cool. It's very, very hot. And enjoy the time that you have. And we'll see you back here next Monday. God bless.